didn't know I was old. My aunt was praying one night. She said she was hurting. She said, Lord, I know what's the matter with me. I'm growing old. So, dear, it slips up on you.
People over 75 are North America's fastest growing population group, a statistic that has created an era unprecedented in history. An era that finds our society, our economy, and our families unprepared to face the crises posed by those we call the elderly. One response has been clear, however. 5% of all elderly people in the United States suffer from abuse. Elder abuse is the abuse or neglect of a person 60 years of age or older, or who is suffering from the infirmities of aging.
I got 2 broken hips, 3 broken ribs, and now I'm pretty near blind. So what more can I do? Put up with it?
After what he did today, you expect me to take him out for dinner?
Elder abuse is often a continuation of a lifelong pattern of family violence.
Give me the money.
But it also occurs in families with no history of abuse, families too chaotic to deal with the needs of an aging member, or families in which the stress of caregiving simply takes too great a toll.
In today's world, where 50 to 70% of women work, they are often still raising children with moderate to little support from their spouses in the child care side, and at the same time they're being asked in many cases to take care of an older parent. May not even be their parent, maybe their husband's parent. That creates enormous stress on an individual.
Old age is a time of acute vulnerability. Loss of physical abilities, the deaths of spouses and friends, and the depletion of finances often lead to a dependency that is difficult to bear.
To become helpless and dependent is a suffering for everybody. It's a suffering for that to happen to me as a person. It's a suffering for the people around me to watch this happen to me. And it creates terrible strain in many family situations, strain that may result in abuse.
Elder abuse, an equal opportunity situation that touches every socioeconomic class, is legally reported in 4 categories. Self-neglect is the elderly person's lack of care toward him or herself. Neglect is the lack of care by caregivers. Material abuse is the exploitation of an elderly person's resources. And physical abuse is the assault or unreasonable confinement of an elderly person. Self-neglect is the most common form of elder abuse, representing about 45% of all cases reported nationwide.
When I was in school, as I said, I used to be a champion speller, and I'd get invited to all the spelling bees that were held throughout the year. You don't seem to fit into the world as well as you did when you were younger.
Yeah, she smelled very, very bad. There was many complaints at her old apartment. They didn't want to be in the elevator with her. The neighbors on both sides of her complained to management about how bad she smelled and the apartment smelled.
Disturbed that she hadn't received a reply to her letters, Carol traveled from Texas to Wisconsin to visit her mother. Upon arriving, she discovered a roach-infested apartment and her mother living in a community-based residential facility suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Her mother had been placed in the CBRF by the Brown County Department of Social Services. She had been classified as a self-neglect case of elder abuse.
Generally, these cases come to the attention of a social service agency because neighbors complain, or people complain about the condition of the home, or are genuinely concerned about the condition of the older person.
It was hard to keep a hold of the things you had to do and the things you wanted to do and the things you were going to do.
Carol obtained legal custody of her mother, removed her from the facility, and attempted to care for her.
Everything was pretty good for maybe a week or 10 days. There was really no problems with my mother or anything. But then she started doing things like getting into her medicine. And then she had a problem with going to the bathroom wherever she happened to be. And we had adult diapers for her, but she would not wear them. She just refused to wear them.
It's just harder to live when you get older. You're more beset with accidents and with troubles like that. And I don't think people are as friendly as they used to be.
When that kind of self-neglect occurs, it doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't a family member willing and able to help. It may mean that the older person is rejecting that help.
When we work with self-neglect often, we see people that don't have a family, or their family is not working for some reason.
I feel like I failed. I only took care of her a little over 2 months, and that was all I could take. She didn't want anybody interfering in her life. I don't know that there's a whole lot more that could be done for somebody that doesn't want any help, because there was in place programs to take elderly people to the store, to the doctor, to come visit, but she didn't want anybody in her home.
I just liked to be free and to do what I wanted to do and go where I wanted to go and see whom I wanted to see.
Wisconsin is one of 12 states where reporting elder abuse is voluntary. Even in states with mandatory reporting, only 1 out of 8 elder abuse cases gets reported. Respecting the elderly person's right to self-determination has been proven to be a more effective way of ensuring his or her well-being. Also, unless the elderly person is judged incompetent and assigned a legal guardian, the victim is not required to accept help until he or she is ready.
The client always makes the case plan, no matter how hard you try to work it the other way. Basically, people are going to do what they want to do, regardless of what everyone else tells them they ought to. And until you recognize that, you're just setting yourself up for defeat, frustration.
Everybody wanted to marry me. There was just something about me that I'd walk down the street, the man would grab a hold of me, I'm going to marry you. And sure enough, I had to marry the so-and-so in order to get rid of him.
Lucille also has been registered through Brown County Social Services as a case of self-neglect. Living alone at age 93, she could use assistance keeping up her house, but she has consistently refused it.
I do things for people, and they do things for me. But they're under the impression that because they do something, that I have to jump when they whistle. I don't do that. If I'm wrong, I shut up. But if I'm right, God give me 2 feet. And that's what he give me to stand on.
Like most self-neglect cases, Lucille is stubbornly independent.
You know, I'm just a crazy kid. I always was a crazy kid, and I always will be. I like fun. Arguments, that's for the birds. Nagging, I can't take it. And I guess that's why everybody liked me, you know what I mean, because I didn't argue.
Lucille accepts a minimum of personal assistance from social services.
I'd like to get somebody to come and live with me, but today it's so hard to get the right people. Because like I say, I lost faith in a lot of people because they brought it on themselves. I didn't do it. They did it.
But trust has been a lifelong stumbling block for Lucille.
I don't know what the word love means. I never really had love. I had like, but love, I couldn't tell you what it means because I never really had honest-to-God love. It was always for whatever they wanted. For what they wanted me for was what they wanted.
Although Lucille had 12 miscarriages, she has no children, no family remaining to look after her.
The man upstairs, I think he's the only one. and I can unload my chest. See, if you got something that bothers you, don't try to keep it in. Let it out, but be careful who you let it out to.
It was just plain neglect, and that is an awful place. It's a hellhole is what I call it.
Neglect is the second most common form of elder abuse. It can be neglect by an institution or by other assigned caregivers.
I went down to the VA to have an operation to fuse my left ankle, and the operation was a success. So I came back, and they never even looked at the foot. It was in the cast. They never took the cast off to check it. Next thing I knew, the infection was running out of the heel of the cast.
Neglect relates to a caregiver who has responsibility for meeting basic needs of an older person, for food, for cleanliness, for personal care, or shelter. When that caregiver fails to provide what that older person depends on them for, then that's a case of neglect.
Vernon was able to save his foot and himself. He moved into independent housing for the elderly on the reservation and works as a researcher for the Oneida Nation Museum.
I had a lot of girlfriends, and a group of us used to go, and we'd go to see these big bands. Those were the days, the happy days.
Taking advantage of an older person by stealing from them or by fraudulently using their funds constitutes material abuse.
Just a con man is all he was, one of those type of guys. Charm you if you wanted to.
Viola was clearly a victim of a life-threatening swindle. Convinced by her daughter and son-in-law to sell her Madison area house, Viola invested $40,000 in a new home meant for the three of them to share. But things didn't turn out quite as she'd expected.
I didn't know it was going to be a basement I was living in, and the garage was connected right to the house. And I got all that carbon monoxide coming right in my place. In the middle of winter, I had to open a window in order to breathe. One time I got out and went over, to the neighbors to call the police because he'd cut my phone lines. And it got so he wouldn't even let me come upstairs and make a cup of coffee or nothing. He took a door and he nailed it up to the side of the wall that goes up the stairs. And he fixed the garage door so I couldn't open it. And I couldn't get out the garage doorway or I couldn't get up the stairs.
Some of the things she had to go through were really very hard on her emotionally, and I worried about her heart condition, and I know she received an ulcer eventually, and I think this really had its toll on her.
Viola wore a pacemaker and took insulin to control her diabetes.
The worst part was one night when I got sick. Nobody around, and I went into the bathroom, and I came out, and I fell before I got to my bed. And there I laid all night in the cold floor. It was cold.
It's often that the older person has really got a lot of resources and is one of the strongest persons in the family and has got a lot of things they can give to the family, and that's why they are abused, that people can go after their resources.
He was supposed to make the monthly payments, and I paid the 40. I was supposed to be able to live there and not pay any rent or anything. And they just got so far in debt, they figured they were going to live off of me,
With the help of an elderly advocate group in Madison, social services, and her lawyer, Viola managed to evict her daughter and son-in-law. After purposefully damaging the property further, they left. Viola sold the house, but never recovered her lost assets. She moved into a subsidized apartment complex for the elderly and survived from month to month with the assistance of her credit card. Less than 2 years later, she died of congestive heart failure. The afternoon of the funeral, her daughter and son-in-law appeared at Viola's bank, attempting to withdraw the remains of her account.
And one of the ladies kissed me on the cheek and said, "Mamie, where did you get that hat?" Well, I'd always keep up with sales, and I was known as a very lovely dresser.
Mamie, a proud homeowner who worked full-time until the age of 82, has been a victim of a variety of material abuses. But the most painful situations have involved her very own nephews, whom she raised from little boys.
Silver has been taken out of here, all my silver, beautiful dishes, tore up a car, personal property has been destroyed. For instance, I was trying to repair the back house, and as fast as I would put the material out there, they would steal it, take it off.
That was really frustrating for all the organizations that were involved, was because she kept letting them back. Because she has an obligation, she feels, to her boys, and that's just what she calls them, her boys.
When you've got youngsters, darling, they have their friends, and they can bring others in. Like, about a week ago, we heard a terrible disturbance in the basement, and they told us, I forgot who told me, but it's a gang called the Disciples. They said that one of my nephews brought some of them down. Have you heard of the Disciples? Yes. See, it is really treacherous, darling.
They would distract her while they had somebody else come in and take something, and Mamie couldn't get around. Very easily, it took her a good while to move from one part of the house to the other.
My nephew knew that I would hide my money down in the covers. Somebody told me, don't put it under your pillow, just put it down in the covers. And I woke up it was early fall, and something was cold on my leg. And I looked up, and there was a young man peeping all up under the covers, because my nephew had told him that I hides my money in the bed.
These guys had turned the basement into a shooting gallery. So, and we're talking about veteran IV drug users.
Alcohol or drug dependency on the part of the perpetrator is a factor in more than half of material abuse incidents. Also, the perpetrator is often an adult child financially dependent on the elderly relative.
They made out my will, and some of it was made to my nephews, and that mostly to the children. And ever since then, they found out about that, and they've been very, very mean. If I pass on, the house they feel is theirs. And he told the one that put his hand over my mouth, said, I just can't wait till she dies, you know.
As director of the Women of Color project in Mamie's neighborhood, Antonia Drew was able to intervene. She contacted the police department and organized the securing of Mamie's property. Since then, the offenders have each been assigned 5 restraining orders, all unenforceable. As often as they are released from jail, they come back to Mamie's.
It hurts, darling, to think that your relatives would do it, but you can't dwell on it. Love people, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Forgive and forget and enjoy life, because God put us here to enjoy life.
Physical abuse is often a summation of the other types of abuse. The first instance of physical abuse is usually preceded by neglect and/or material abuse. Any form of violence, unreasonable confinement, or force against an older person constitutes physical abuse.
The worst one I had was a man that was trying to poison his wife with arsenic, and he was sent to prison. And he didn't kill her, but he did, and she did end up in a wheelchair from the poisoning.
The intergenerational nature of abuse is part of all types of elder abuse.
A son maybe saw his father deal with mom like that, and they'll even say sometimes, well, my dad used to, that's the only way he could handle her, so I have to handle her that way when she gets crazy, too.
Psychological maltreatment is always a component of abuse.
What I see as the most degrading part of the psychological abuse is that it takes away that person's feeling of power over their own life. And I think when we disempower an individual, then we probably cause more harm to them than we've done almost anything else, because we've taken away their ability to control the rest of their life.
Name-calling, for example, is a common but powerful form of emotional abuse.
You know what a little mule is called? That's an ass. Yeah. You ought to be dead, you old bee. That's those kind of things. That makes me feel terrible. Like, if you died and get out of the way, we would have everything the way we wanted.
The system, too, can be perceived as abusive.
Anything you ask anybody, they don't know. You'll have to get the right authorities, proper authorities. I don't have the authority of doing that. So who am I going to get? I can't read the phone number. I don't know who to call. So that I just have to let women suffer for it.
The cost of long-term care can severely reduce the assets of an elderly person and his or her family.
Again, it's an abusive situation where in order to provide adequate care for someone, we have to impoverish their spouse.
Costing an average of $35,000 per year in Wisconsin, with no help from the state until the family spends down to poverty level, nursing homes are almost always seen as undesirable by the elderly.
No woman in her good mind wants to go in a nursing home because they're busy and they don't need. Well, do you think I should consider going to a nursing home?
But good nursing homes sometimes are the best solution to a stressful situation. After a second unsuccessful attempt at caring for her mother, Carol placed Helen in a nursing home that she now has come to accept.
Well, I like principally the way they treat you here. They treat you like a human being and not just a number or anything like that.
Federal, state, and county governments, along with many private agencies, have set up programs attempting to ensure that no elderly person goes without the care he or she needs. These programs have proven vital to providing independence to elderly people and relief for their caregivers. But waiting lists are long. It is not unusual for elderly persons to spend 1 to 3 years waiting for fundamental services. Despite the agony of waiting lists, no one needs to suffer from elder abuse. Every state has social service agencies as well as specialized agencies on aging that must respond to elder abuse complaints within 24 hours. Physical abuse and other medical crises can be handled by dialing 911.
What I care about is whether you get someone who says, I want help. They don't ever have to admit, to me at least, that they're being abused or neglected. All they have to do is consent to accepting help to get themselves out of that situation.
Ideally, elder abuse will be eliminated entirely, but this will take a rich understanding of the genuine needs of the elderly, the kind demonstrated by Berdella, for example. Not many people have the insight that Berdella has as she cares for her 87-year-old mother.
She needs to retain some flexibility in order to be able to walk and keep her balance and catch herself. That's one way that she can do it.
In simple ways, Berdella has ensured that dignity is a regular part of Augusta's life.
I think oftentimes older people are forgotten, and they're left to sit in a chair, and the whole family life revolves around them, but doesn't include them. And we have tried to have Mother be a part of our life. Mom still likes to go grocery shopping, and she can follow along with the cart very nicely. She has no problem with balance, and she pushes the cart for me, and I fill it up. And she still lets me know if the apples are good or if the lettuce is good or maybe those bananas are too ripe. She still has some input. Here in our home, we've tried to provide a view for my mother. We live on the bay, so she watches the ducks and the geese on the bay.
Well, it's beautiful. First it's the birds, and then there's the squirrels, chipmunks. It's interesting.
But all this care has taken personal sacrifice.
I've given up the freedom to come and go as I want, and I guess I've never regretted the fact that I've given up a career to take care of my mother.
Not everyone has the resources it takes to be a good caregiver. Verdella has no children to compete for her time, and she has the active support of her husband. She also knows the precautions caregivers must take to prevent abusive situations.
You have to realize that you have to take time for yourself. And if you are in a good state of mental health, you can be a real friend and a real caregiver to that person. But if you let yourself get down and frustrated by trying to do too much, then you're going to have a tendency to be abusive.
I would say if they're going to try and take care of an elderly person, to make sure that they have enough other help in the family and support. Definitely. And to sort things out for themselves, make sure they've got any childhood conflicts resolved, because those things do come out when you're under stress, and especially when you've got an adult who's behaving like a child.
As the population continues to age, younger members of our society will have to make critical decisions about the care and treatment of the elderly. And regardless of how many services are made available, those services will be meaningless unless they are delivered with respect. For sometimes, the last dignity any person has is the power of choice.
Fill your dreams with sweet tomorrows. Never mind what